Chapter 14, the cutaneous senses. Now, cutaneous refers to the skin. So there's three parts to the somatosensory system. That, in other words, the system where we sense information from our body. The first is the cutaneous, which is perception of touch and pain and other stimulation on the skin. Proprioception is our ability to sense the position of our body and limbs. So at all times we are sensing the location of our body in three-dimensional space. And then kinesthesis. It's the ability to sense the movement of our body and limbs so that we can control our movements. So let's now go into the cutaneous system. The cutaneous system, of course, involves the skin. Now, the skin is considered a single organ, and it is the largest organ of the human body. Obviously, one of the most important functions of the skin is that it protects us. It protects the organism by keeping stuff out of the sensitive guts of your body, the stuff that's inside. So it keeps out chemicals and harmful bacteria and viruses and everything else from penetrating inside the body. The very upper layer of the skin, the part that you touch, is called the epidermis. Epi means outside, dermis means skin, so it's the outside of the skin. Most of the epidermis, is made up of dead cells that have been pushed up, and we slough these cells off during the course of the day. You slough them off when you take a shower, and you slough them off in your clothes, and we just constantly slough off dead skin cells, and they get replaced by skin cells from below. The layer underneath the epidermis is referred to as the dermis. It is not dead, it's alive. So it has blood vessels and millions and millions of cells inside of it. There are receptors in the dermis, and this is where the receptors in your skin live. The mechanoreceptors are those specialized receptors that respond to all of the different physical vibrations and pressure and touching that you feel on your skin. These are referred to as mechanoreceptors. One of the types of mechanoreceptors are known as Merkel receptors, and you can see them here on the left of this image. These receptors fire whenever they are deformed by pressure. So whenever you put pressure on a certain part of your skin like this, you can feel that pressure because the Merkel receptors are being bent and deformed and are sending a signal to your spinal cord. And they can also tell the Merkel receptors on your fingers can also detect very fine changes, so we can detect details and with our fingertips. Another type of mechanoreceptor that you have in your dermis is the Meissner corpuscle, which is this oval-shaped cell here. And what this does is it fires when it gets activated, then it shuts off, and then it fires again when it gets turned off. And so it only fires when it gets activated, and then it fires when it gets switched off. And we use Meissner corpuscles to control our grip, our hand grip control. So in other words, if I want to know how much pressure to apply to hold this object in my hand without breaking it or without dropping it, just the right amount of pressure, much of that information that I'm using to regulate my grip on this object is transferred to my brain, starting with the Meissner corpuscle. Again, we have the Merkel receptors, which fire continuously while they're being pressed, and they are also responsible for sensing fine details. The Merkel receptors that are present in our fingertips help us to sense fine details. And then the Meissner corpuscle, which provides feedback for us as we're controlling our hand grip. There's two other types of mechanoreceptors. The Ruffini cylinder. It fires whenever it's being stretched. So these little cylinders lay across parallel to the muscle fibers beneath them, but they're in the skin. And whenever your skin is being stretched, these things fire. And that's to prevent us from stretching our skin too far, of course. And then the Pacinian corpuscles fire only when a stimulus is first applied and then when it's removed. So it'll fire whenever it gets something first applied to it, and then it'll fire again when it gets removed. And if you notice, that's what a vibration is. It's the rapid firing. It's the rapid, the rapid application of pressure and then removal of pressure. So we use our Pacinian corpuscles to detect vibrations. Here on the left, you see a Ruffini cylinder. Again, it's a little long structure that is in the dermis that is innervated by a series of dendrites, and whenever the cylinder is stretched, that sends signals ultimately to the spinal cord. And then the Pacinian corpuscle, you'll notice here on the right, looks a lot like sort of layers of an onion, and these layers allow it to detect vibration because of the construction of the corpuscle. The physics of the corpuscle allow it to be very sensitive to vibrating sounds. All of the different layers will sort of jiggle around and make contact with each other in specific ways whenever a vibration occurs. So it's able to be very sensitive to the onset and offset of the vibration patterns. So the nerve fibers from these all of these millions of receptors we have on our skin bundle up. So all these different receptors each have a little tiny fiber, and all those fibers join up into nerve bundles. And these nerve bundles travel through our from our skin, ultimately ending up in our spinal cord, synapsing in our spinal cord. Once the information makes it to the spinal cord, the information then makes its way upstairs to the brain. Now, inside the spinal cord, there's two major pathways where information from our cutaneous receptors travels. The first is the medial lemniscal pathway, and it consists of very large fibers that carry movement and touch information. The spinothalamic pathway carries thinner, smaller fibers, and these fibers are related to transferring temperature and pain information. These fibers enter the spinal cord through, like if the fibers, for example, on the right side of your body enter the spinal cord to the right side, but then they cross over to the left side, and then they make their way up into the brain. So the left side of the brain is feeling what the right side of the body is experiencing, and vice versa. So here's a cartoon drawing going from the touch receptors, say for example Meissner's corpuscles or the Pacinian corpuscles that we have in our tips of our fingers. These nerve fibers travel. They have their bodies in the dorsal root ganglion, which is this little lump here right outside the spinal cord. And then the fibers enter the spinal cord, synapse, and then cross over and then make their way up into the brain. So here's the spinothalamic tract, which carries the pain and temperature information, and the medial lemniscus, which carries the touch and body movement information. Now, we have several of these areas where along our spinal column where dorsal roots go into our spine. It's just not one area. Our body's actually divided into regions. segmented regions going from top to bottom. And each one of these segmented regions is handled by a specific dorsal root that corresponds to that segmented region of the body. And this is how doctors, neurologists can tell, just by doing a very simple exam with some very simple tools. Neurologists can tell exactly where you have nerve damage in your back or in your spinal cord or any of the dorsal roots, like with a disc compression, for example. They'll measure how well you can move and how well you can sense pain, simple pain, temperature, and touch in different parts of your body. And by testing all of that, they can tell exactly at what point in your back you might have damage without even looking at an MRI, for example. So a well-trained neurologist is able to do that. So the information goes from the receptors through the dorsal root into the spinal cord, then it makes its way up, synapsing in different areas of the brain, the hypothalamus, the thalamus, and then ultimately ends up in the cortex, this part of the brain up here, the very uppermost part of our brains. And there's a spot on the cortex, which we refer to as the somatosensory cortex. It receives a lot of the inputs from our sensory apparatus in our skin. The signals travel from the thalamus to the somatosensory receiving area, which we call S1, and the secondary receiving area, S2, that's located next door in the parietal lobe. Now, the really interesting thing about the somatosensory cortex is that it's mapped out according to the way our body is laid out. So, for example, the part of your somatosensory cortex that is responsible for processing the information from your fingers is right next to the one for your palm, which is right next to the one for your arm, which is next to the one for your chest. So there's this nice layout of a map of the human body on our somatosensory cortices. Not only that, the size of each area of the somatosensory cortex is regulated or is based on how sensitive each part of the body is. So, for example, one of the most sensitive parts of our bodies for touch is our tips of our fingers. So there is a very large amount of cortex devoted to our hands because they're so sensitive. Another very sensitive area of touch on the human body is our lips, which is an obvious evolutionary advantage because this is a port. Our pie holes are a port where stuff goes in, so we want to have very sensitive detectors there to make sure that what's going in is supposed to be going in, right? So so you'll notice in the somatosensory cortex there's an awful lot of cortex devoted to regulating the processing of sensory information from the mouth area. There's different. Each area controls multiple aspects of sensory information. So we're still not. We still don't really understand completely how the somatosensory cortex puts everything together to create a perception for us. But we do know that the cortex the somatosensory cortex has a lot of overlapping functions to control the processing of information from the different body parts. So here's a kind of a slice of the cortex. So what we've done here, this cartoon drawing right here is a picture of the brain, the human brain. It's the outside of the human brain. Now this is a side view of the brain. So this is your forehead right here. This is the back of your head, the top of your head, and the side of your head. So your eyeball would be about here, and your ear would be about here somewhere. And then this is area S1, the major somatosensory area, and then area S2. And as you can see, If you were to look at the amount of space that's devoted to each part of the body, you'll notice that there's a lot of space devoted to the lips, a lot of space devoted to the hands, and of course the genitals, because those are very sensitive too. And you'll notice not so much to, say, for example, the head. If you've ever gotten a cut on your head, you can get a very severe cut on your head, that bleeds like crazy, and it doesn't hurt that bad. But of course, heaven help you if you get a paper cut on your finger. That hurts a lot, right? So you can see how this differential processing of pain is going to affect differentially how you experience a stimulus, like a painful stimulus on your body. Of course, we also feel we also have pain processors, sensory processors from our teeth, gums, and jaw, which of course, if you've ever had a toothache. Our tongue, obviously. Our pharynx, the pipe that goes from our mouth into our chest. And then, of course, our guts. We actually have quite a bit of sensory information devoted to cortical space devoted to processing sensory information from our guts. Which, of course, if you've ever had a really bad stomach ache, right? That's pretty miserable.